Hello, my name is Dr. Ana Maria Mihalcea. I'm the president of AM Medical LLC and the author of the book Light Medicine, A New Paradigm, The Science of Light, Spirit, and Longevity. Today, I have the extraordinary honor to actually interview one of my heroes, a true light to the world, Jane McClelland. She is an award-winning author of the book How to Starve Cancer. Jane herself has been diagnosed with two terminal cancers from 1994 to 2004, and through her willpower and her desire to live, she underwent an extraordinary journey of self-education on something called repurposed drugs and novel cocktails. And she was one of the pioneers at a time when this was not even known, when she brought this forward to save her own life. Since then, when these cocktails worked so well, she has been able to help thousands of people around the world to educate cancer patients and doctors on novel therapies with old drugs that have profound effects that can bring hope to so many. Jane has received the Lifetime Achievement Award of 2019 for Amazing Women Global for Unsung Heroine. She's actually talked to Parliament in the United Kingdom to bring these new therapies forward. She's a continuous advocate. And by the way, she's a national champion in sailing and I believe karate and all kinds of other things. So please meet Jane, and I'm so happy and excited to talk to you today. Hi there.
Hi Anna, thanks for bigging me up like that. I don't normally have all my sporting stuff listed, but that's fine.
I think it's so important because willpower and determination, which is needed to undergo this journey. It shows in many different ways in life.
That's true. I suppose the killer instinct to and the willpower to drive and the competitive spirit, I suppose, is part of me, and probably why I kept pushing forward and kept trying to look for answers. And I was, doggedly determined, and I didn't give up. So yeah, I think it probably is part of my makeup to be that kind of person who is going to keep pushing.
That's absolutely fantastic. And would you tell us a little bit about just your background? Because what brought you now to be such an inspiration to so many cancer patients? I mean, you're somebody who truly is living her own wisdom and advising people from personal experience, a unique and rare gift in the world. Please tell us more about you.
Well, I think the reason that I do what I do is because I have this belief, and I know that what I did saved me. And what I've done is learn. I've educated myself, because when I first discovered these drugs, these repurposed drugs, and I didn't know exactly all the mechanisms of how they worked at the time, but I have a training. I'm a chartered physiotherapist by training, so I had some medical background, and that made me far more curious about the actual biochemical methods to which these drugs actually worked. And I knew that starving the cancer was quite critical, and I also knew that we were missing the cancer stem cell with treatments, that actually that's the reason that cancer keeps coming back, is because the cancer stem cell is left behind after chemo, radiotherapy. The traditional treatments, they don't touch the cancer stem cell because it's slow dividing, and those treatments are only designed to get the fast dividing cell. So I wanted treatments that were actually going to get right to the core of the problem, to those stem cells, which I knew were not being addressed at all by conventional treatments. So I was looking at anything that was actually going to reduce the ability of the cancer cells to feed themselves. So it was a matter of finding different routes so I was starving it of glucose to start with berberine. I then moved on to metformin. Later on, I discovered that actually once I had already got myself into remission, I was helping another cancer patients at that point. And that's when I discovered metformin in about 2007, helping other people. And then I used dipridamol, which is an antiplatelet drug, and that stops nucleoside transport. So it actually stops the cancer cell scooping up little chunks of DNA, because it's quite lazy and it needs these nucleosides to make new daughter cells, the DNA for its daughter cells. It's constantly replicating itself. So it wants all the stuff it needs. It sort of doubles in size. So my thought was that if you stop it from getting what it wants to double in size all the time, and that's fat, that's protein, and of course glucose, which is the energy to do it, then you're going to put the brakes on. And so my thought was to put the brakes on. I wasn't looking for remission. That was kind of a goal I wasn't expecting. But hey ho, that's what I got. So,
That is amazing. And you
yeah.
went, you yourself went the traditional route. You had chemotherapy and radiation, and then later continued to augment these therapies, and you learned a lot about how to combine different therapies. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And eventually I came up with this strategy, which I've called my Metro map in my book. And it's a little triangle with glucose on one side, glutamine, which is a protein, although there are other proteins like serine, asparagine, things like that, but they're all proteins. And then at the bottom, I've got fat. So I've got the three sides of my triangle, and I've worked out the fuel lines. It's very basic. There's actually interplay a little bit between the two, but between each side. But effectively, I worked out that if you block one of those pathways that the cancer cell is using to feed itself, if you block it with a drug or a supplement, it'll find a different route, normally on the same side of the triangle, to compensate. So it's a matter of just blocking key things together. And one of the things I did actually was blocking fat, because dipridamol is not just an antiplatelet drug and stops nucleoside transport. It actually stops a pathway called SREP2, which is a cholesterol pathway. So I was blocking cholesterol. I didn't know that at the time. I discovered that later. It's like, wow, I've blocked both of the key cholesterol pathways. So I blocked the SREP2, and I blocked the mevalonate, which is the one that's blocked by statins. So one of the other drugs I took was lovastatin. That's one of the first statins that came out. It's quite an old one now and rarely prescribed, but it's got to be lipophilic. It's got to be a fat-loving statin in order to work. And lovastatin is, atorvastatin is another good one. Simvastatin is another good one. But the point was that I blocked these two pathways at the same time, and every cancer cell on its surface needs little cholesterol blobs in order to make a daughter cancer. It's a replica of itself, but it needs those cholesterol blobs. And without those cholesterol blobs, it can't actually survive. So it's a matter of getting two synergistic pathways, and then a cocktail of, I block quite a lot of pathways actually,
Yes.
but really, really effectively blocking two or three really well can make a massive difference to the growth of the cancer. And eventually, if it can't get enough food, it just withers away and dies. So that's the way, that's the approach, is to actually stop it getting all the nutrients that it wants in order to keep on that continual replication to create those daughter cells. That's the theory, and it's worked for me, and it seems to work for quite a number of other people too. So,
And you've also used some antibiotics, like is that doxycycline, because
yes,
of potential. Some people say that cancer also has an antimicrobial, there's some viral etiologies, fungal etiologies. And so things like doxycycline, like mebendazole, fenbendazole have had activity. So you've also implemented those in the cocktail, right?
I never took doxycycline. That wasn't one that I took. That is part of the Care Oncology Clinic protocol. So they've got 5 drugs now, but they started off with just 4, which was they used a statin, so atorvastatin. They use metformin, which is like me. I use berberine to start with, which is effectively a supplement version of metformin, and then I switched to metformin. In fact, I alternate between the two. They've also got doxycycline, which is an antibiotic, and they've got mebendazole, which is an antiparasitic, very commonly used in the UK. You can't get it so much in the US, but very commonly prescribed for kids with worms in the UK. Get it over the counter. So 4 very common drugs. They've also added a liposomal form of ibuprofen, which is encapsulated in fat, so it doesn't rot the stomach in the same way. And all of that has a great, they all have different pathways that they hit, but they're synergistic. So they're not just targeting one pathway, they're targeting, in fact, most of them actually target more than one pathway anyway. So you then get this synergy of lots of different pathways being targeted at the same time. And the effect is multiplied because it's not just added. So if you block one pathway, block another one, it's not just that plus that, it's that times that. So you actually get this really bigger effect when you actually add 2 things together. The synergy is actually bigger than just the individual sum of each other. It's an exciting approach because, you know, once you've got the right synergies, you really get this fantastic response.
Yes, and you also have done a lot of things with high dose vitamin C and other nutritional supplements to support the body through
Yes,
this journey as well, right?
exactly. And a lot of people don't realize, I mean, the supplements have never made it into mainstream oncology because you don't have randomized clinical trials done on those because they're just cheap and, you know, they're readily available. There's no pharmaceutical interest in terms of trying to get any, you know, get the money to do that because they're not going to make any money out of it. So these things are rarely tested in proper clinical trials. And yet when you look at the evidence, you know, there are levels of evidence, but an awful lot of them are tested in vivo, and so that's on, you know, either in mice or in humans actually. So you can have some really good quality data on a lot of these supplements, but unfortunately it's not really explored or looked at by most oncologists, so it's kind of dismissed, which is a shame. But I've used, you know, I trawled through all sorts of literature in order to find the right cocktails for myself. I am still known as maracas because I still take an awful lot and I, you know, I rattle, but it's, and actually for cancer patients nowadays, supplement overwhelm can be a little bit of a problem because, you know, you do end up taking quite a few, but it's a matter of being organized and, you know, just trying to make that part of your life which isn't overwhelming. You have to be very not just organized, you just have to be really quite strict with yourself as well, but just in the times that you're doing it, and the rest of the time you need to get on and live, you know, because it's very important once you have cancer to focus on the cancer for particular parts of the day and say, right, I've got to address this, blah, 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 and then you park it and you try and live your life. Really important. And so many patients are so overwhelmed with cancer and it becomes all encompassing, and it's frightening, it's terrifying. I've been there, you know, I thought I was going to die. I was absolutely convinced I was going to die, and the thought of dying would just enter my head all the time. It was really tough, and I
What
know
did you do about that when these thoughts came? Because I obviously a lot of my patients and people in the world with cancer face that. What was your strategy, you know, to deal with that? Because the fear of death is overwhelming and it
it is.
activates the sympathetic fight and flight system. It actually makes your cancer spread more. Uh,
Right.
so, what was your strategy with that?
To learn and to educate myself and actually look at, I bought myself every single positive cancer story that I could find, you know, because back then didn't have the internet in the same way. There wasn't the same information. So it was mostly through books and through, you know, proper research through PubMed. And you couldn't do that online either. So that was tough. so I had to go to hospital libraries, and I was, I spent a long time just trawling through all sorts of stuff in libraries. It was huge. I mean, it took me so much of my time back then just trying to educate myself. But it was, whenever I got, and you do read these, the problem is when you're a stage 4 cancer patient, you're confronted with the statistics all the time, which are really depressing, really depressing. And it just knocks you back, and then you think, no, that's not me. It's not me, because I am doing different things. These people haven't done what I'm doing. So you put yourself in a different category and you say, right, I'm not even part of that. I'm not part of those stats. That's not me. And it does require a sort of a fairly strong sense of self, I don't know, it's just level of confidence that you know that you are doing the right thing. And my confidence grew and grew the longer I survived, obviously. And, the more I learned, the more I educated myself, the more I was convinced that I was finding the answers. And, it was a really long journey of discovery.
I want to ask you a little bit more about your experience. Obviously, I'm a doctor and I'm pretty open minded because I myself had cancer, and I understand some of the psychology that's gone on, but I still see a lot of people who really struggle in talking with their oncologists because they're trying to support themselves. They're trying to do different things. They want to work with their oncologist, but some of the things that they're doing isn't accepted. And so, how to build that relationship, because sometimes the patient, when they start educating themselves, they start knowing more about these alternative options than the oncologist, and it's a
Absolutely.
challenging place to be. And I know that you've had some issues in
Yes.
terms of just working through those experiences and the wisdom of learning how to maneuver that. Can you speak about that?
Well, I also had family members who were doctors as well, who didn't really approve of me doing my own thing. So I really kept everything very quiet. Even to my, close relatives, I wasn't really discussing much. They just saw me taking bundles of pills every mealtime. And other than that, they didn't really know what I was up to. In fact, the oncologist kept asking me. In fact, she was very open-minded, really. As oncologists go, she was, and this was back in 1999 through to 2004. But she didn't. She kept asking. In fact, actually, I saw her all the way through from 94 through to 2004, the full 10 years. Actually, I hunted her down because she was so good. She moved out of London, and I made a massive effort to track her down because I got a new oncologist who I didn't like at all, did not get on with at all. And I would say that to anybody who struggles with somebody who is very closed-minded with their, with their treatment, to try and find a different oncologist. It really does help if you have somebody who you can chat to. But I wasn't telling my oncologist any, as much as she wanted. She still doesn't have the full picture, unless she's read my book by now. Might have done. I've never sent her a copy, actually. I should probably do that.
Yes, actually, I read it. I think your book is absolutely brilliant, very well researched, and I recommend it to any doctor. Any doctor, absolutely.
Well, it's a bit revealing, some of it, isn't it? Because it's all about the sort of personal struggle, and also, the interaction of patients. When you're a patient, you have to struggle with trying to get your relatives on board, as well as your oncologist and your friends. You've got this network of people, some of whom are not going to like what you're doing or think that you're hastening your own demise, or, and sometimes you might be, if you make the wrong decisions with your complementary treatments, you might actually, I don't know. I mean, there are some treatments that actually cancel each other out, which is quite interesting. So, for example, when you're trying to oxidize, when you've got prostate cancer, for example, if you're trying to oxidize the cancer area and you're kind of doing ferroptosis or using intravenous vitamin C, or if you're exercising, actually exercise in particular, actually with prostate cancer, if you exercise very strongly, that gives you much greater chance of recovery. And if you take pomegranate juice, that also raises your chance of recovery, but it's very powerful in vitamin E and luteolin, pomegranate juice, and that actually counteracts the oxidation effect that you get from exercise. So actually, if you do them both together, you cancel each other out, so that you actually get no benefit from the exercise and no benefit from the pomegranate juice, which is kind of worrying. So it's quite important to know the difference between a starve phase and then pulsing with an oxidation phase, which I kind of call my kill phase. So they are two separate types of treatment, and it's trying to make sure that you don't cancel them out. So antioxidants in particular, you've got to be quite careful if you're doing intravenous vitamin C or oxidation therapies, because at high dose, intravenous vitamin C, as you know, produces hydrogen peroxide in the tumor environment. So it's working as a pro-oxidant, and you want to work with that in order to try and make more oxidation rather than use antioxidants at the same time. Certain antioxidants in particular. So the pomegranate, luteolin, genistein, quercetin, those are actually all very powerful, but the most powerful are CoQ10 and vitamin E for stopping the oxidation. And ferroptosis, which is something I'm talking about in my new edition, which is coming out soon.
Oh, fabulous. We're looking forward to that. So I think it's very important, what you're also saying, a lot of people want to go out there and they want to support themselves. And then, for example, they might undergo chemo and radiation, and they may not understand that certain supplements are actually, neutralizing, for example, the chemo. They have to be stopped several days before and, restarted a couple days after. And you have to have that phase so that if you are undergoing cytotoxic chemotherapy, for example, that you have the full benefit. So to have somebody who's skilled and trained in that, is important, to work with somebody and to not be out there on your own. I mean, I love your educational program, etc. But you also, I think that particularly in the acute phases of disease, cancer patients need the support of somebody who can guide them through this field in terms of what are the specifics for their disease state.
Yeah, and that's the problem. It's finding enough doctors like you who can help. That's the problem. We don't have enough of you. Can you clone yourself, please? Because there just aren't, we don't have enough to go around, and not all patients can afford the kind of care that they probably should have. I mean, we're lucky to have the NHS in the UK, but even so, they have this mindset that they don't have to pay for any kind of medical treatment. So a lot of them just refuse to ask for help from anybody else. And it's such a mistake, because they are missing out. The value you get from somebody who's trained, who actually understands more than just the straightforward oncology, but look at the metabolism of the cancer cell, look at your nutrition, look at your overall lifestyle, your well-being, and your mental health as well. Somebody who can actually take the bigger picture of what's going on, and not just sort of, right, this is the cancer, this is the lump here, we're trying to shrink it, and it's all about shrinking the tumor size, and it's not really addressing the cancer stem cells and the reasons everything comes back again. So it's all about shrinking the tumor, and it's not really addressing the whole person in a holistic way.
So you are doing a lot of work in terms of educating particularly patients, but also doctors, and you have this course because this is complex information for somebody who's never really, went on this journey of studying. And one of the things that I'm noticing a lot is because a lot of cancer patients have never heard about, how these combination therapies work, or even that there is such a thing as a repurposed drug. It's overwhelming in the beginning, so you're dealing with your diagnosis, and then you're supposed to study all of this stuff in a language that you've never heard before,
Exactly.
and then you're supposed to go on this regimen and adhere it completely strictly and change your lifestyle and how you eat, and it's a lot. And so you've really developed this program of helping people. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I've created an online course. I've split it into 12 modules and a summary. And I go through very basics as sort of just to start with, just the sort of the organizing yourself, because that really is quite critical, just to actually organize your pills, organize your life. And I go through every single step. What I've done is I've broken down cancer into 5 key hallmarks rather than the 15 or whatever that the conventional treatment has. I've just split it down to 5, and every drug or every supplement will fit into one of those categories. So that's how I parcel and pigeonhole things off in my head, and I work out where it fits in my protocol. So I've worked out why supplements work and which pathways specifically they all work on. So I've just basically chopped down the whole of the sort of the cancer, from the way it starts from the cancer stem cell right the way through to how it develops into this fast dividing tumor, and all the processes that happen in the middle, which are not addressed by conventional treatment, and that's where we're missing great chunks of treatment potential. The starving the cancer, which is the metabolism, is so key to actually getting rid of that cancer stem cell. Then we've got growth factors as well, which are not really addressed. Some people are given Avastin, or Pazopanib, but that not many of them are. There are other ways to stop the growth factors. And in fact, dipridamol, one of the drugs I took, works on something called MMP9 and MMP2, but that's a growth factor. All right. And so it's looking at, so my approach is really to starve it, stop it spreading, and then snuff it out. So you starve it with the metabolic kind of starving protocol, stop the growth factors to stop it spreading. And then when you've got everything, all your ducks in order, and it's weak and it's vulnerable, boom, that's when you go in with either intravenous vitamin C, can't speak, and then, or you do some other protocols. You maybe add some chemo, low dose chemo, even pulsed, and then you can add some other oxidizing therapies alongside it. And then you get this much bigger effect where you're able to sort of eradicate the cancer much more effectively once it's weakened and once you've stopped those growth factors. And then your immune system obviously is, it kind of comes on the back of that. Once you've got all of those things controlled, your immune system has a chance to start working again, because all the growth factors, all the metabolism will create a bad environment with the immune system, where you have immune cells that actually help the cancer rather than fight it. So you have tumor associated macrophages that work with the cancer and protect it rather than fighting it. So when people read immune cells sometimes in the literature, they're a bit confused, because actually some of these immune cells are pro-cancer and they're not anti-cancer at all. And that's the point that people need to know.
And one of the things that you talk about a lot is the importance of also your diet. I have a lot of patients that say, "What am I supposed to eat?" And to cut out the carbohydrates, and we have heavy metals pollution. We have, can we eat fat? Can we not eat fat? Should we be eating meat? And it's such a confusing thing. Can you speak a little bit about how have you maneuvered that, and what do you recommend to people?
Okay, well, primarily you need to go low glycemic. That doesn't mean to say necessarily ketogenic. It has been shown that actually after 28 days of the ketogenic diet is when it's most effective. And then between 28 days and 90 days, it learns to rewire and use these other routes, so using glutamine and fat instead, and actually it doesn't come all the way back up to sort of where you were before. It's still weaker and it's still more vulnerable, but it's not as effective as sort of where you are at 28 days. So just doing a low glycemic diet isn't enough, unfortunately. You have to go low protein. Certain proteins are, vegetable proteins are much better for you than the animal proteins, generally speaking. Some people can get away with a little bit of meat, but most cancers do tend to fuel themselves on glutamine or certain amino acids. So that's quite important. But the fat is only just becoming recognized as not just a way of cellular communication, it's also another route for the cancer to get fuel. It does use it as fuel, and there are some cancer researchers, quite prominent researchers, who totally ignore the implication of fat. They just talk about glycolysis, glutaminolysis, the breakdown of glucose, the breakdown of glutamine, as being the key. Once you've got that, oh, then you don't have to worry. Not true. You have to look at the fat as well. It really is quite key. And, I blocked both those two cholesterol pathways. That made a major difference to everything else I did. But there are, I've got fat transporters. I've added in my second edition, which coming out, a few more things onto the Metro map, I'm afraid. It's a little bit busier on the map. But lactate transporters as well, I've got on there, as well as glutamine transport. That's really quite critical. So actually stopping the transport across the cell membrane and getting those things into the cell, you can use certain ingredients, certain supplements and drugs at times, in order to block the cell actually accessing those things. So for example, Joe Tippins, who used fenbendazole, but he also used a type of vitamin E. He used gamma and delta tocotrienol. That helps something, it stops something called the ASC2, which is a glutamine transporter. So actually he was helping his immune system. He was also taking an immunotherapy drug as well. So I think it's just a combination of things together. It's always about a combination. It's never about just doing one thing.
And it's important that every person is unique and individual,
Yeah.
and that the unique needs of the cancer patients, with all of their background history, as well as what they accept in their own treatment, that has to be factored in. If people
Yeah.
don't believe in what they're doing, that's
Yeah.
counterproductive. And so
Exactly.
I think that finding ways in which there are many, many options, that is the takeaway here. Many options that can be helpful, and working together with a practitioner that can help you find this way, getting your information, informing themselves, to be able to be more knowledgeable, because the more knowledge you have, the more you're able to ask intelligent questions that you are able to help yourself with, become your own advocate and make choices for yourself, and also understand that even if your loved ones and your family members or other people have different opinions than you, you're responsible for your own life. And ultimately, you live for yourself. And that this journey can be so confusing, but we have to follow our own path, whatever that may be. There's no, there's no one cookie fits all type of thing. But fact is that there is people who with terminal cancer were told they're gonna die, they're still alive, they're thriving, they're a light to the world. And that's the important message here.
Yeah, it isn't necessarily a death sentence. And unfortunately, oncologists still view stage 4 as always a death sentence. They may have treatments that they feel will prolong their lives, but actually predominantly they have this thought that the cancer patient, traditionally it used to be only a year if you were given stage 4 diagnosis. Nowadays it's a bit longer than that. But back when I was, going through it, it was certainly less than a year for stage 4. And the average survival when I got my stage 4 for my cancer was only 12 weeks. So, it's come on a long way, but we still have to get round the mental block. Unfortunately, oncologists they don't always mean to do it, but they just beam these bad vibes onto a patient, and they can get patients in such a depressed state. And I've had patients who've been told repeatedly, you do know you're going to die, don't you? It's just a terrible thing to, just be totally stripped of any hope all the time. And, what is that doing to the patient's psyche, to just completely remove any kind of hope? It means they don't bother to go and look for any complementary treatments. They just might as well just give up at that point. It is grossly unfair. Doesn't, and very often oncologists leave it right until the last minute, when quite obviously the patient is dying. Just before they go to hospice, they say, you do know you're dying, at which point it's again probably too late to be doing much. It would be much fairer to the patient to be talking more openly about the diagnosis and saying, I appreciate that you don't have many options at this point. If you want to explore other things, we can discuss it. And I hope they would be open to discussions. I think we are gradually starting to see the cracks opening slowly with the oncology profession. It's taken a long time. I thought by now, there was me back when I was having treatment and trying to find different ways to get myself better. I thought, wow, in 20 years' time, this is going to be so different. It isn't. I am gobsmacked, that we are still so far behind with learning about these repurposed drugs, with the cancer metabolism. It's still not accepted by the mainstream that the cancer metabolism is key. You need to look at that. You need to treat that. And they don't. They just ignore it, or they just don't know about it, or they're just not bothered to learn. I don't understand it myself. I would have thought if you're in that kind of profession, you would make an effort to find out at least what the patient knows, and the patients are definitely far more educated nowadays. Thank God for the internet. Thank God for, I have a thriving Facebook group with over 40,000 people in it now, and lots of conversations, lots of input, lots of sometimes the wrong information. It can be, a lot of people post incorrect things. It can be very hard to police that all the time. But the point is that you have discussions, and overall I have an awful lot of knowledgeable people on my site who've done my online course, who've read my book, and they can help chip in with the right kind of answers to a lot of the questions. But it is a minefield out there, and it's very easy to take a wrong turning or to look at research in the wrong way, and sometimes you get research that actually comes out that will negate. In fact, there was one out this morning that was showing mebendazole was not so good for very advanced GI cancers. If you're going to start just one treatment on its own with a very advanced cancer, again, it's got workarounds, it's got salvage pathways. If you're just giving it one thing, it's probably already using autophagy, and mebendazole stimulates more autophagy. And autophagy in cancer patients is not the same as autophagy in a healthy patient. Autophagy kind of helps the cancer survive. So it's scooping up, it's pulling in lots of different nutrients. So mebendazole, it doesn't surprise me at all that mebendazole on its own in an advanced GI cancer is actually not going to help it unless you're doing something to block autophagy at the same time.
And I think, you touch about something, sometimes the studies themselves are set up in a way that maybe certain repurposed drugs look much worse than they would be if the trial was set up slightly different. Like you're discussing, if you use extremely advanced cancers who already have underlying conditions, etc., then anything you use isn't going to do that great. So it's just how also the statistics are being read. What's the selection of the pool of patients, etc. It's sometimes in the science literature very skewed. And when people don't have the scientific background on how to read the literature, sometimes they come to a wrong conclusion and they throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing. So
Yeah,
that's why it is important to have scientists who are able to sift through the statistics, through the, the
yeah,
setup of the study, etc. So it can be a very complicated field, but I just
yes.
want to say, thank you so much for, giving of your time, to so many people, to being such hope. I think that, what you're speaking about, the oncologic field and its change, some of the pressure of change comes from the outside, because the more people like you and, the people who follow you and who are, educating themselves, they're the ones then who are actually the change facilitators when
Mm.
the change doesn't come from inside the system. And many doctors who are endeavoring to help, are being suppressed or, run into all kinds of problems. So I think that, this grassroots movement of educating people and really being supportive will ultimately greatly facilitate that change that we want to see in the oncology world. And I'm so grateful to you that you're doing everything that you're doing. Can you just tell us briefly, where can we find you? And I will also post the links, but please tell people.
Okay, so I have several. If you go to my website to start with, which is howtostarvecancer.com, I do have links to my Facebook groups. I've got one for the book, which is just How to Starve Cancer. I've got one where all sorts of different off-label drugs are discussed. That's Jane McClelland, Off-Label Drugs for Cancer. And then I have my online course, which is on Teachable, and the link for that is also on my website, as is links to get my book and my new edition as well. So they'll all be on my website.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being such a light to the world. Thanks so
Oh, and
much,
it's my
Jane.
pleasure. Thank you. And
Thank you.
it's I'm trying my best.
You're
And
doing
I just,
wonderful.
I just love the fact that patients and doctors are embracing this now. So I'm really thrilled, really thrilled. So thank you.
Absolutely.